Hi, everyone. Kumar Dattatreyan here with the Meridian Point. And today I'm really pleased to introduce to you and my audience, Alan Zucker, who brings over 25 years of Fortune 100 experience where he has led agile transformations for over 170 project managers, delivered thousands of successful projects using both agile and traditional project approaches. After pivotal roles at MCI Communications during the telecom revolution and Fannie Mae during their transformation, he founded Project Management Essentials in 2016. Alan bridges the worlds of traditional project management and agile, authoring over 150 articles and teaching at UVA and University of Georgia. He's passionate about intentional hybrid approaches that focus on what works rather than dogmatic frameworks, bringing practical wisdom from managing multi-million-dollar programs to help organizations navigate today's evolving landscape. So without further ado, let me invite Alan to the stage. Hi, Alan. It's great to have you on.
Great to be here, Kumar. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Yeah, this is going to be a good conversation. Actually, you and I have known each other for quite a few years.
Yeah, probably a decade or so.
Yeah, at least 10 years. I know we didn't work together while at Fannie, but I knew of you, and I think you knew of me when I was.
Well, you were part of the Agile COE, so you probably had a lot of other people that you're focusing on. But I did remember you very well. I think
Yeah. It's interesting how the circles that we travel, we tend to bump into each other quite often. You've described MCI, that's one of your earlier experiences, as fierce, competitive, entrepreneurial, and agile, a decade before these concepts were codified. What made that culture so special, and what lessons from that disruptive upstart should today's organization remember?
So it's funny. Probably if you're under 35, you have no idea what long distance phone calls are. But for those of us that are older, long distance, back until the mid 80s, there was one company, Ma Bell, and MCI just upended that entire industry. And it was a startup. It was disruptive before the internet. In fact, we were one of the big internet startup companies. And I think there was a lot of things that made MCI special. One is this idea that our role was to disrupt telecom, to knock over AT&T and the seven baby bells, as they ended up being. And it created a culture that was entrepreneurial. It was risk-taking. The idea that we could break into the telecom market was one thing, but that permeated the entire culture. And I remember at one point we were updating the employee handbook, and people were invited to provide input to it. And one of the call outs that I submitted that got published was, the great thing about the company is that on any given day, anybody could do something amazing. And it created that culture where people at all levels of the company were empowered to do amazing things. And it was fun. It was internally very competitive in a good way in terms of finding the right solutions and getting things done.
I think that's probably a common thread with companies that are disruptive in nature, right? Is that they tap into the talent of the people that work in the company, empower them and that word is also interesting. It's as if when you go work for a company, your power is stripped from you and it's somehow not yours anymore. And the companies that manage to not make that so, that you have your own agency, you have your own voice, and we want to hear it, those are the companies that tend to be more successful and disruptive. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite stories, and when we talk about empowerment, to me, a way we show empowerment is through decision making.
Yeah.
And we were getting ready to launch. We're entering a partnership to launch long distance service in all 48 continental U.S. states. And I was a senior manager in the finance department. I ran the financial reporting systems. and my boss was the director of accounting. And she said, here's this product description, go to this meeting, find out what it's about. And so I went and I explained it to her, and we were working with the vendor. I said, should I assume we're going to get our reporting from the vendor, or do we build our own?
Yeah.
That was the only question that I asked her. She's like, we should build our own.
Mm.
And, we did it. And
Yeah.
that was crazy because we signed the MOU right before Thanksgiving, full national launch in April.
Wow.
And
That's
the
pretty
company,
rapid.
yeah, well, but that was what we were used to.
Yeah.
And the company also did not have a top-down management structure. It was really a network structure.
Mm.
And so, people we had all worked together, and we knew how to organize and get things done. And it was the first time we ever established a PMO for a big
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
And there were just 3 people, and they were really mostly making sure that everybody was coordinated
Mm.
and attached to each other.
Yeah. So you were lean and agile before those were really terms that people understood to mean anything.
Yeah,
I want to
absolutely.
go to this question from the audience, right? From Strategic Bravery Coaching. I don't know what your name is, sir or ma'am. If you would leave your name, that would be amazing also. And you're right. Many with Agile experience have been laid off. Where do we go from here? And in some ways, and not to pivot completely from the topic, we're talking about disruption. And in many ways, Agile is being disrupted. By what, I'm not sure, but Agile is being disrupted. So this is a good question. Where do Agilists, and I will just share my experience in a minute, but I wonder what you might have to say to this person. Where do we go from here?
That's a great question. And it's actually, one of the things that I started talking about and actually spoke at the Dubai International Project Management Forum about back in January was this notion that we need to start talking about project management differently.
Hmm.
And I think that if we go back to the early 2000s, even into the 2010s or so, there was a sense of like, we've got our traditional ways of managing projects and we've got Agile. And there was this, this rivalry. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah.
We saw that at Fannie Mae. And I think what we ended up seeing was there was a lot of bad Agile. And one of the articles I wrote is "Don't blame Agile for bad Agile." And I think we saw, one of the things I saw is that a lot of organizations would completely invert the first value statement, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, and they
Yeah.
implement agile processes. We have daily stand-ups, we've got a Kanban board, but we haven't changed the way we work.
Yeah.
And I think that project management really is at another inflection point. And I feel bad for a lot of folks. I had a lot of friends. You had a lot of friends probably as well that have been let go, that were Scrum Masters or Agile coaches. And I think that the things that we provided in terms of building culture, helping teams, needs to transform a little bit. And I'm not sure what that next wave is. One of the things that I've been writing about, that I'll be speaking about at the University of Maryland PM Symposium in May, is this idea of going back to basics, looking at the things that we know that work, looking at hybrid as a way of how do we blend our traditional and our agile practices for what makes sense for the given projects that we're on.
Yeah, I think that's really useful, because there's right today, I and some of my colleagues are supporting a big client in their transformation to these agile ways of working, and I feel it. I feel the tension between the more traditionalists and the coaches and the scrum masters and the other people that have been brought in to help change how work gets done. And to the question on the screen from Adam. Adam is a friend and colleague. You may know him, Adam Beck, from his days at Fannie.
Mm.
Adam, and myself and you, and we've all been through this. And the person that asked the first question, right? So where do we go from here with Agile sort of being disrupted? Is that it has been, and to your point, there was a lot of bad Agile out there, and it didn't really produce the outcomes, the results that people were expecting. And so I don't know that it is necessarily a uniquely an Agile thing. I think a lot of money right now is going towards AI, which brings me to my next question, right? So you're back to basics. I think it's a blog series, is it?
Mhm.
A series of articles? Yeah. Suggests that project management as a whole is at an inflection point, with Agile being one way to run things, right? It's not really
Mhm.
projects, but it's more the value that comes out of those projects. And interest in Waterfall and Agile has waned. Hybrid is still ill-defined, and everyone is talking AI. So what's really happening to our profession, and why is going back to basics the answer? I know you alluded to this a little bit.
Mhm.
Maybe you can expand on it.
Sure. And so, I mean, AI is the big elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Lots of interesting data, a lot of interesting trends. Is it going to be real? Is it not going to be real? Is it going to, is half of the workforce going to lose its jobs? Um, there was an interesting stat that I read within the last couple of months, and there was some work out of MIT, which found that I think over 90% of the companies that have invested in AI haven't seen the return on investment yet. And
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of cool things that we can do with AI. I mean, I incorporate it into everything I do,
Mhm.
work-wise, home-wise. I was looking at, new running watches. So rather than reading websites, I asked ChatGPT what it thought. Um, but I think specifically to project management is about people.
Mhm.
And so if we get AI so we can come up with better estimates for time or cost, or it can take the hard work out of pulling this data together and synthesizing it for us in terms of how's the project doing, that'll be great.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, it's not about the nuts and bolts of how do you manage the project, but it's how do you influence people? How do you manage a group of customer stakeholders who may have divergent objectives? How do you manage and organize and work with teams? And both of us, our primary backgrounds in software development teams, testing teams, multiple teams if we're doing safe. How do we get all those people to really work together as a group so
Yeah.
that there is that symphony versus just discordant noises coming from multiple areas,
Yeah. I'm
and
totally
that you
with you.
can't automate.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the push towards AI and the money that's being spent there by especially the large companies, and the move away from Agile is maybe it's related, maybe it's not. I don't know. I do know that Agile is not new. And
Mhm.
strategic bravery coaching, the question that came, the first question, Taz Brown is his name. Thank you for the question. And you actually have another question, and he asks about how most companies have invested in Agile in the IT space, although Agile is applicable much broader than that, right? To your point earlier, oh, I'm sorry, it's a she. Sorry about that. I just assumed. So, like in my experience, my experience with Agile goes way back when I used to run restaurants, and I knew nothing about Agile at the time. However, that restaurant was the epitome, if you will, of agility, because you had to be. Your product lifecycle was measured in minutes, not months or years, right? And your customers were there in front of you every day. You had a relationship with your customers that most developers on a team developing software, whether they're using project management, traditional project management techniques, or Agile, will never have that kind of relationship with their customers. It's through some proxies or many proxies that they develop software that they think is going to be fit for purpose. And so I think that Taz, you have a really good point that there's been a lot of layoffs, maybe related to AI, maybe not. But the key is that I think that it has been disrupted, and we as Agilists, people that work in this profession, need to think of other ways to bring agility, that mindset. What Alan, what you were talking about, it's about the people. It's how people work together. It's how you form teams, and the influence that you have over product decisions, things like that. It's up to us to sort of bring those types of principles and values to the work that we do. And I'll just say this, and then I'll turn it over to you, Alan. One of the things that we've done at Agile Meridian is we created this framework that we call the disruptor method. There's nothing about Agile in there. Like we don't go in and say, you have to do Scrum or you have to do SAFe or whatever. What we do have instead is very simple principles that are much aligned with what you were saying, Alan. Like it's about the people, it's about sound leadership principles, it's about collaboration, it's about coordination, it's about making sure that there's alignment so that people can behave more or less autonomously, right? That you don't have to sort of micromanage the work that people do because they already understand the mission, they understand the purpose, and they can go do it. So I don't know if I have a question here. Do you have anything to add to that, Alan?
Well, I agree. So I think there are a lot of things. One is Agile is a mindset, and if my daughter works at Fannie Mae and she was part of their WOW team, their way of working team.
Oh, okay, I remember that.
And yeah, and so they were bringing Agile practices to non-technology spaces. The idea of doing standard work. The idea of doing daily huddles or daily stand-ups by tracking work across using Kanban. And so it applies. And in fact, I put together an online course with one of my training partners, which I call Agile Beyond IT. How do you use Agile principles in non-IT settings? And one of the, interestingly enough, and I do have an hour presentation, and one of the things I show in there's a traffic circle here in Arlington, or now it's a traffic circle, but it was this crazy 5-way intersection. And so before the county ripped up the street, they put cones down and they painted it so it was a traffic circle, and they ran experiments for I don't know, 6 months or whatever. And, in addition to focusing on people, I think the other big thing, just from a process perspective, and there's lots of ways of doing it, is the idea of doing the iterative and incremental development, the idea of getting feedback. And my first introduction to Agile, so, I'll just put in air quotes, was 1986, 87. My training's in economics. I was working for a small consulting firm, and we were building a financial model. And the guy I was working with had built similar models, but they were programmed, and we were doing it in Lotus 1, 2, 3. I didn't know what I was doing. He'd never done this before, so I'd build a little bit. I'd show it to him, build a little bit more, ran into a problem. We'd troubleshoot the problem. And we went from having a spreadsheet that was, I don't know, half a dozen rows wide to about 3 alphabets wide by the time we were done. But it was really just using that iterative and incremental approach. I didn't know that's what we called it. It just made a lot of sense to me to collaborate and to get feedback and to work with folks.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's been the experience of a lot of people that I talk to, is that, it's a common sense way of working. You iterate through the problems, you prototype the solutions, you get feedback, and the faster your feedback loop is, then the more information you have to build something that is fit for purpose.
Right.
And the questions that Taz is asking is really relevant, though, in this time, right? So because there's so many layoffs of people that are in agile roles, Scrum Masters and so on. And what would you say to those people? What should they do to sort of improve their resume, improve their skills? I mean, they're probably very skilled, like yourself and myself. There's a lot of people I know that are out of work. that are very skilled, very strategic thinkers, very, they're excellent coaches. They can bring people together and help them form as a team and all that, but yet they're not employed.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately when it comes to project management, we've got involved in labeling things. And I think the labels have ended up hurting us.
Mm,
Scrum masters versus coaches. Are you doing Scrum? Are you doing Safe? And I think that, and I don't even know what the cool new word is these days. I know for a while, um, it was like project execution or IT. I don't know what the magic words are for your resumes today. But I think it's rather than holding on to, well, I'm a scrum master. Well, the title, the skills that you learned as a scrum master are invaluable.
yeah,
But if you're going to be looking for scrum roles, there's not a lot of those. But if you
yeah,
think about there are whatever those roles or that title is for someone that needs to lead a development team, how do it's talking about what those roles are versus or what are the skills I have and how did I make that team more effective versus just saying, well, I'm a scrum master. Doesn't everybody need a scrum master? Um,
right.
um, so I think that's, and that's part of the reason, when I talk about hybrid, and I hate the hybrid label, but I think we need, and that's why I sort of have morphed to like, let's go back to basics, which is we're managing projects and there's lots of things we need to do. And we need to understand the context of our organizations in order to be successful. For example, if you're doing Agile in a government setting or contract software setting, there's just constraints on what you do. So you have
Yeah,
to think about, well, given those constraints, what are the things I need to do to offset it and not see that as a hindrance, but just recognize that's part of the environment.
yeah. It seems to me, Alan, that you're kind of before I ask the question, I want to acknowledge Taz's comment here. Um, it's been her message about how to move change, towards courage, outcomes, values to other areas beyond IT. And she said earlier about her system has nothing to do with Agile at all. It's more
Mhm.
about the outcomes and how people interact with each other is what I'm getting from that. So kudos to you, Taz, because I think that's the way and the path forward. And what you just said, Alan, also I resonates very much with me. I try to help a lot of people that are in the situation that they're in, being laid off and stuff, to think about the skills that they have, not so much the titles that they had, right? Because the skills are far more important than the titles. And if they can translate those skills into a resume that reads more aligned with the jobs that they're applying for, they probably have a better chance of getting a job and exercising those skills again. Although I still call myself a coach because that's what I do most of the time. 98% of my day is coaching.
Well, and
Um,
and just with that, it's fun. It's funny when I was at Fannie Mae. I was running that huge team of project managers, and this is I think 2013, 2014
yeah,
ish time frame, and I got everybody cross trained to be Scrum Masters. So
yeah,
that and probably 90x% of them did a really great job transforming because they
yeah,
were adding new skills to what they had,
right.
and I think it's not that it's going back, but I think if you're a scrum master, you've got lots of great skills. There might be some other skills you need to also pick up,
Sure.
um, but it's we need to think about it as skills versus, as I said, that titling.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You've said before, you've identified in our last conversations, three core rules for, I guess, for high performing teams, like psychological safety, empowerment, and making it simple.
Mhm.
These sound simple, yet most organizations fail at them spectacularly. What's the real barrier in your view?
I think the real barrier is psychological safety. So I wrote an article about applying these simple rules because everybody wants to have a high performing team. And the more I thought about it and the more I researched and dug into it, psychological safety is the key.
Mm,
a dozen years or so ago, Google did that big study of what were the high
Aristotle.
performing
Yeah.
teams, the Aristotle project. Thank you. And the theme was creating psychological safety. I think that was contributed 40% of what made high performing teams. But it's hard. Um, it's sort of counter to what we've been taught as our traditional management approaches.
Yeah.
The traditional management approach, top down, command and control. I'm the boss. I tell you what to do. And even in a lot of agile environments, it's really hard for managers to really give up that control.
Yeah.
I remember when we were at Fannie and we took one of the first teams we took Agile, and the manager was supportive, but I remember him saying, I'm a manager. I worked my way up from a dev lead or from a
Yeah.
dev to a dev lead, and now I'm a manager. What do I do? Like how do
Yeah.
I change the way I work or the way I think? And so creating that environment where we're willing to let go, we're willing to have people feel that they're part of the team, that what they say is valued, and we're willing to allow them to question us as leaders and managers, that creates that psychological safety.
Yeah.
You have to have that before you can have empowerment. And then the last role of making it simple is there are so many barriers in so many organizations that just make it hard to be effective. And if we
Yeah.
want people to build high performing teams, we need to look at everything from the way we're organized to the physical space to how we incent people, not just money wise, but just in terms of recognition and praise, so that
Mhm.
we're focusing on the team versus focusing on the individual.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Would you say that managers need some support as well? Because maybe it's a case that they don't themselves feel psychologically safe to give up control because they're being evaluated on their ability to manage. And if they don't, if they're like, okay, what do I do now? It's probably a cry for help. Like, really, what do I do if I'm not managing? What should I do?
I,
Um,
yeah, I think it's a couple things. One is most folks that are managers aren't taught to be managers. You're good, whatever you're doing, we're going to promote you to be the manager, but we're not going to teach you. So
yeah,
you look around and you see people that are typically, it's that top down command and control kind of mentality. And creating trust or having that trust between managers and team members is really hard
mm,
because it means that there's no punishment coming from the top of the organization all the way down.
yeah,
And sort of bringing it back to when I was at MCI, one of my friends was in the product development group, and we had some amazing products where we just crushed it, making money
hmm
hand over fist, and we had some absolute flops. Just
hmm
and and one of the things she said is that no one was punished for the bad products,
hmm hmm
and if you got punished for ideas that flopped, then
you're
you'd
just not going
start
to
playing
try.
it safe.
Yeah, yeah,
And so, the ideas of, fail fast to succeed sooner, um, those are all important components to how do we create great disruptive organizations where people are willing to take risks and potentially do phenomenal things, amazing things.
yeah. No, that resonates a lot with me, right? So you've got to have that sort of mindset and mentality that, hey, let's let teams flourish. Let's let them make mistakes because they're going to learn from it, all of that stuff. I want to get to the question on the false binary, like it's either project or agile, right? Management.
Mhm.
Your keynote in Dubai was about intentional hybrid project management. Um, what does intentionality look like in practice, and how do you help teams pick the right practices for their context.
So I think both, I think, and I've observed, and I've actually seen data on this now too, that most teams don't really think about what they want to do or how they want to execute their projects.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes it's we just do things by default. Our organization's Agile or our organization's Waterfall, or we really have no practices whatsoever.
Yeah.
So the idea around intentionality is as we're starting our projects, let's think through the things that we want to do
Mm-hmm.
and document them at the appropriate level. And, it's not to have it, I think one of the documents that doesn't get produced enough is a project management plan. And it doesn't have to be a big, huge plan that no one will read, but how are we going to manage risks? What tools are we going to use?
Mm-hmm.
How often are we going to do it? Are we going to like all those things so that it doesn't become something that it's like, oh, we've got our risk management log that we never look at.
Yeah. Right.
Or just pick any practice.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that we're doing the right things?
Mm-hmm.
One of the I was also one of the original discipline agile instructors and coaches when PMI acquired DA.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I really appreciate about DA is that if you go to the DA browser online or read Choose Your Wow as a book, they've codified all these thoughts and all these decision points. There's
Mm-hmm.
and it's a little bit too much for most people, but I think
Yeah.
that the idea of let's think through what do we want to do, where are we having problems, and rather than being haphazard about approaching those, how do we begin to think through, well, if this is the problem that we're having, let's do a retro. And I don't care what kind of project you're doing, but let's review it, let's think about it, let's try something, let's see how it works. If we didn't get the result, then let's try something else.
Yeah.
And I think those practices are invaluable regardless of the type of projects that we're doing.
Yeah. I love that. So it really kind of sort of custom designing for the team and the context that they're in, and they get to sort of experiment and pick the things that work best for them in that context. What could be more agile than that?
Yeah.
I wanted to address another comment from Taz, and she has another one after this, right? It was, I think, related more to the prior comment or the conversation we have, the question that we had about management and making sure they have the right resources to lead effectively, and maybe that the reason they lead the way they lead is because of the skills that they have or the skills that they lack, or as leaders, as managers, and or the way that they're rewarded, right? And so I think Taz is onto something, is that most of the time Agile is focused on the IT organization and not so much on HR or other departments or divisions within the company. And I think I need to just figure out how to get Taz on this show, because we could have a good conversation as well. You're right, Taz. HR often does need the most help, in terms of they need to be part of the transformation, whatever the transformation has entailed, right? Because it's about the people. To Alan, to your point, it's about the people, how people work together, and the skills that they possess, and how to leverage their skills and talents to the benefit of the organization as a whole, and of course the customers ultimately. And so we do need to involve the human resource department, because it's about the humans in the loop, right? What would you say to that, Alan?
I agree, and I don't know if you recall, but when we were Fannie Mae, originally there was not a job title of Scrum Master. And then
Right.
they titled Scrum Masters, and it became even more complicated, because if I'm
Yeah.
a project manager, I do an Agile project and I do a traditional project, or a multiple, then what job role am I in?
Yeah.
So I think that as organizations, we need to be very intentional about how we organize the work. And to Taz's point, um, a lot of Agile was too IT centric. And not that IT didn't need to be Agile, but they needed to be doing it with the business versus doing it alone. And I think, one of the things that made Fannie Mae very different is the closeness between the business groups and the IT groups.
Mhm, mhm.
Like literally, it was both physical closeness as well as just sort of emotional closeness.
Mm,
Um, at one point when I was in the finance group, my IT group was one floor above. And
mm,
I wore out the treads of the stairs running up and down to talk to them.
yeah,
And that closeness of the collaboration was critical.
yeah,
And when we actually moved across the street, we were in two separate buildings that were only about 20 feet apart. But the lack of that just one floor closeness began to separate things out. And
yeah,
so I think that, to Taz's
mm,
point, Agile needs to be, it needs to be about building those relationships.
yeah,
Is the fourth principle, business people and developers working together daily.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it wasn't meant to be a product owner that was a proxy for the business.
Right, right. Yeah, those are all really good points, and it brings to mind. And I know we're running a little long here, which is okay. This is a great conversation. One of the things that has happened over the last since the manifesto was written, anyway, the last 25 years, is we've become less connected rather than more connected, right? And especially since the pandemic, where most people are
Yeah.
working remotely. And your example of just being able to go walk up and down the stairs to meet with your business counterparts. Today, it's a call over Teams or Zoom or whatever with cameras that may or may not be on, right? So there's another layer, another barrier to
Mhm.
collaboration, communication that we have to contend with. Um, How do you think that is affecting our ability to forget agile, just
Mhm.
conduct our work?
I think it's made it a lot harder. Um, during the pandemic, I was interviewed for it was Tufts Business School, and they were looking for people to talk about agile leadership. And the last question was, what do I think about remote and hybrid? And I said,
Yeah,
it'll be really interesting in 5 years to see the companies that brought people back in versus the companies that remain remote and hybrid. It's not that you can't be remote or hybrid. It just, to your point, it adds a whole other level of complexity of communication and relationship building.
yeah,
And not to overuse the word intentional, but we need to be much, much more intentional about creating relationships when we don't bump into each other at the coffee machine or
yeah,
in the cafeteria. And I think that's been the challenge.
yeah, yeah. Another question from Taz. Taz is on a roll here. This is a good question, though. It's like for all the people that are agilists that have, I was a PMP at one point, but I let my certification lapse. In your intentional hybrid model, would it be wise to brush up on or learn project management skills to complement the skills that you already have, and why?
So PMI, yes. The short answer, yes. PMI just last week published or released the PMBOK version 8.
Hmm.
And I haven't gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, but I'm actually pretty impressed with that current version because it moved away from this rigid process perspective, which was editions 1 through 6. Then version 7 was these very lofty principles. So it's refined the principles down to a half dozen principles. But then they talked about the things that we need to consider
Mhm.
just a very basic process perspective. And it's not perfect, but it creates that structure. And I think it's much closer than anything we've seen to date in terms of how do we just talk again about project management
Mhm.
versus traditional versus agile versus lean versus and I think we just need to get back to that. We're managing projects. We need to use the skills that make sense for the type of project that we're doing.
Yeah,
And
makes sense. Yeah, and some would argue that project is a bad word. We shouldn't call them projects. What would you say to those people?
um,
And the reason they might say that is because projects have a definite beginning and end, and an agile team just stays together. They're just working on whatever the next thing that has value, as determined by, call it a product owner, call it
yeah,
whatever, product manager, whatever it might be.
gosh, languages are great because it gives us a common way of communicating, but then words um, take on other connotations.
Yeah,
Like if you don't like the word project, that's fine. I'm missing a word that I would put in place of it
yeah.
to describe
Just
what we
can't
do.
call it a work. Let's just do the work.
Yeah,
That's not descriptive enough, right? So yeah, language is definitely it can be an ally, and also can be a constraint sometimes because we don't have the right word for things. Anything I didn't ask that you'd like to share, Alan?
um, I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I mean, I'm looking forward to as I'm beginning to pull out the threads or tease out the threads of this idea of back to basics. So if folks want to go to my website or follow me on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to have that because I've been publishing those updates about once a month, usually the beginning of the month, and I'd love to get feedback on that, just
Yeah,
so that it's an inclusive perspective.
yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, if for those of you that want to reach out to Alan, he teaches often. He teaches at UVA, at University of Georgia, but he does a lot of his own stuff as well. And I think that as you sort of put together this your thoughts around this hybrid model, intentional hybrid, that may be something that I'd love to have you back on the show, maybe to talk about it a little bit more.
Love to.
I'll include his information. I think it may already be in the description of this talk, but I'll make sure that if it's not, that you have the information so you can get a hold of him. And Taz, thank you so much for being such a prolific commenter. She asked, "Am I the only one here?" And you're not. There's others watching this on LinkedIn and YouTube, and unfortunately, the Facebook stream didn't work for whatever reason, but there's many others, but you're just the most chatty, which I really, really appreciate. So thanks again, Alan, and thank you all for watching. Have a happy holiday this week, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot. It's
Bye,
great seeing you.
everyone.